These stories were told to me by an older colleague back when I was still just a sergeant. Cases we didn't solve. That's rare, you know. These days, there are cameras on every corner, GPS transponders humming under the dashboards, cell towers triangulating a moving dot to within a few meters. You can follow a suspect's heat signature from a helicopter and reassemble the rest from a dozen lenses. If you wanted to get poetic, you'd say you can hunt from orbit. People still try to slip away, but the city has eyes now. Back then, those eyes were half closed. The technology either didn't exist or was so new it broke when you breathed on it. Body cams weren't standard. Dash cams recorded to tapes that jammed if the night got too cold. I carried a notepad, 2 pens, and a pair of boots that kept no secrets. That was the kit. That and your nose for a lie. And then there were the nights when the lie wasn't human. Nights when the evidence refused to add up, not because a clever criminal had hidden it, but because whatever had left it behind didn't care about our arithmetic. It walked around our logic like a puddle and kept moving. The older cop slid 3 folders across a metal desk one rainy midnight and said a line that stuck. "You solve the ones you can, kid. These you survive." The folders didn't have case numbers stamped on their spines. The incident summaries were hand-typed and soft at the edges like they'd been handled too much. Photos were in plastic sleeves that picked up your fingerprints and kept them. The official record pretends these files don't exist. But sometimes, on nights when the building empties down to the bones and the HVAC clicks like a tired metronome, I take them out and let the old smell come back to me. Damp paper, toner, coffee, and that faint electric tang metal cabinets hold on to after a storm. I'll tell you 3, not because they're the worst, but because they still talk to me when I try to sleep. They aren't clean, they never will be. I'll talk in one voice, mine, the way I remember being told. And if I slip into the older man's cadence here and there, forgive me. He's the reason I didn't go down certain stairs alone. He's the reason I leave some doors closed. If you're looking for an ending that put a man in cuffs, you won't find it here. What you'll find is the shape of the thing that wouldn't fit inside the badge. It started, like a lot of bad stories do, with a smell. Not the kind you catch in a week of heat when trash piles up and the city ferments a little. That sour, familiar funk you can almost forgive. This was different. People called it battery acid and meat, the kind of stench that makes your tongue think it's been burned. It slipped up through storm grates and into kitchens and hollow stairwells. It lived under the city's language. Neighbors began to use it in sentences the way people use a person's name when they're afraid to say death. When a smell stays, you call the city. Public Works went down with clipboards and rubber boots, came up brushing their hands on their pants, swore the mains were fine. The smell didn't care. It grew teeth, it found new streets, and then people started to vanish. No common thread to hold on to. An elderly woman whose kettle still whistled when her daughter used the spare key. A 16-year-old who texted, "Be there in 5," and made it halfway across an alley. A janitor walking home from a night shift, keys and ID badge later found on the sidewalk like he'd set them down to tie his shoe. I could list them until my mouth went dry. You build walls in your head when you do this job, and the smell walked through them. We were told to help Public Works do a sweep, assist with safety, the memo said. I remember the ladder down, metal rungs slick with condensation, the breath of the tunnels rising like something patient. The walls were brick for a stretch and then poured concrete, sweating both the same. The air carried a wet iron taste that coated teeth and made every swallow sound too loud. Lights went down and came back as weak cones. The water at our boots made an argument with our sense of balance. We moved the way you move when you have to, not because you're brave, one boot in front of the other. The body an instrument you're playing by memory. There were marks high up on the walls, streaks of something muddy scrabbled into long lines. Too high for rats, too low for a tall man to reach without his shoulders scraping. We told ourselves they were from maintenance. Someone dragging a tripod, a ladder, because a human mind does you the favor of finding plausible sentences until it can't. Deeper in, the smell picked up a sweetness that made the back of the throat twitch. Wet hair, burned sugar, old pennies. The tunnel widened, swallowed our light, gave it back in a way that made distances lie. And then the beam fell across movement, low and too quick for a person not to fall. The light healed and something slipped just beyond it, a ripple of slick plates bending around a corner that wasn't on any plan. You know that feeling when your body makes a decision your mind hasn't signed yet? One of ours peeled off into the side passage and the rest of us followed, because leaving a man alone in that air would have been an answer we couldn't live with. The side passage narrowed, the ceiling low enough to make backs ache, the water colder by a notch that felt like a warning. It opened on a chamber that had no business existing under our city, vaulted, older than the brick we'd come through, echoing in a way that made sounds come back thinner and sharper. The beam lifted, and for a second the world didn't admit what it saw. Then it had to. A mound rose from the center of the chamber, at first read as debris, bags, timber. Then the mind did the count, sleeves, belts, hair, bodies layered like sod, fresh on top, older below, bone like driftwood down deep, shoes where feet should have been, a child's sneaker with its cartoon character face turned toward the stone. Above the mound, clinging to the curve of the chamber like it had shaken off the fact of falling a long time ago, something unfolded. It was all wrong angles and sliding plates, reptile and insect in a practical argument, long limbs that took weight at joints our bodies don't have. The eyes were the worst, layered, glossy, reflecting the light back fractured, like you were seeing your fear through someone else's thoughts. When it moved, it didn't flinch. It repositioned, fast but deliberate, as if the geometry of the room belonged to it. Memory gets fuzzy at the edges where terror eats details. What I know, it was fast and knew the chamber better than we ever would. It came off the wall half like a drop, half like a skitter, and there was a flurry of limbs, a wet sound like something being pulled apart where it doesn't want to separate. We pulled one of our own back by the straps of his gear, and his body felt like a bag with someone cutting strings inside. He lost 2 fingers cleanly, as if taken, and his forearm looked chewed not by teeth you'd know, but by something that tasted to learn. We got him out because a ladder back to bad air is still a ladder away from that room. He kept whispering a word in the ambulance, like it had walked out of his mouth on its own. Nest. The hospital stapled him together. The department put his badge on a plaque and set it on a shelf he would never dust. His mind cracked like ice on a winter hydrant, making sounds you heard even when you weren't near it. Later, when the city went back down with a bigger plan and better lights, they found the chamber. We pulled names from that pile, enough to write letters to families and see their faces fold in the ways you never forget. Nothing living was there when the concrete dust settled. We filled the access with rebar and slurry and a prayer nobody wanted to say out loud. The official sentence hung on a bulletin board for a few weeks before someone took it down. Remains recovered. Investigation suggests human actor. Nobody believed it. We took the stink home in our clothes and learned which soaps could lie to our noses. People like an ending they can talk over dinner. This one had an end that closed itself. I still smell it when rain lifts heat off the manholes in summer. That sweet metal breath coming up. patient, like something below remembering how we taste. Some cases walk into your station wearing your face. This one rolled up under the lights with a paint job like ours, a row of numbers that should have lived in our system and didn't, and a pair of uniforms that were perfect at a glance and wrong the longer you looked. It began with a quiet error. A suspect was set to transfer from holding to county. Routine. He left our doors in handcuffs between two officers everyone swore they recognized by posture and jawline. There's a shorthand to how we move a body without malice. Firm, efficient, human. The handoff never showed in the log. The van's plate number came back a ghost. The suspect didn't arrive at county. People assumed a clerical mistake until the second transfer vanished, and the third. Out front of the courthouse, a camera caught it too clean to ignore. A cruiser at the curb, two uniforms guiding a man down the steps. The footage didn't glitch. The light was good. Their badges flashed at an angle that should have given us the numbers. The numbers looked like what numbers look like when you remember them a minute too late. Right shape, wrong fact. Their faces were, how do I say it? They wore expressions like a mask you've smiled in too long. Not frozen. Overlearned. Their lips formed words that matched the choreography of what they should have said, and if you took away the sound, you wouldn't have noticed. With sound, something in the timing made your brain hiccup, a half-second slip between intention and speech. We tried to put our hands around a pattern, and all it gave back was cold. Every disappearance they took sat in the same moral corner. Men who had hurt children. Abusers. Predators with paper trails like oil slicks. If you wanted to let yourself off the hook, you could say the world had chosen to be simper in its justice. But a theft of a body is still a theft. Process matters, even when the heart wants it not to. There was one survivor, if you want to call him that. He came in shaking so hard the coffee went out of his cup and onto the floor. He said he'd been stopped by uniforms after midnight. Lights behind him, a tap on the glass, the request and the rhythm he recognized. He got out because you don't make it worse for yourself when you see the bars faint in the air ahead of you. He noticed the car first from a distance. Looked like ours. Smelled not like ours. Up close, it carried a dampness that didn't belong in a machine, a warmth like something that had been breathing. He swore the seats were wrong, not foam, but a slick resilience that yielded under the hand the way a throat does. He said the cuffs had a grain to them. He said the door panel flexed when he leaned his shoulder into it like cartilage. You put that in a report and the room gets quiet as an empty church. We wrote what we could stand to read. His description of the vehicle didn't match the inventory. The plates didn't return. The officers couldn't be identified by badge. He disappeared a week later. You can say it was fear. You can say it was guilt. Or you can say whatever took him decided it hadn't finished its job. We set up a dragnet once after 2 more transports went missing in 1 month. Stings make you feel in control. You put a suspect in the right place and wait for the wrong car to do the right thing. We waited through 1 long night and learned what it feels like to be ignored by something that knows you're there. The street soaked in neon and mist. Everything cinematic enough to matter, and nothing arrived. The suspect we'd baited sat in protective custody eating bad vending snacks while the city went about its small sins. Around 4 a.m., a cruiser with no plate and its light bar dead rolled past a camera 2 boroughs over. Later, we looked at the stills beside our fleet photos and found 17 details to argue about. Differences so minor an eye had to work to see them, and so big a gut could not forget them. The angle of the A-pillar, the spacing on the grill, the way the tire kissed the curb like a lip, it kept happening. Slowly enough to be a rumor, regularly enough to become policy. Someone would run interference on a transfer with a paper excuse, and the room would carry a new tension like humidity. We started walking inmates to vans in pairs with names you could write on your hand. We started checking plates twice, even when we knew them the way you know your own house number. Late nights, when the city goes hollow and the jobs find their real shapes, I'd catch sight of a patrol car down a block, idling, lights a little bluer than ours, a posture too relaxed, the silhouette of two heads in the front seats not talking. If I blinked, it would be gone. If I didn't, it would drift away like a boat slipping its mooring without a sound. People will tell you the world takes care of its own sometimes, that it corrects, that if monsters go missing, some book somewhere balances. I've held too many ledgers to believe that. Justice without a body still leaves a space in the drawer where a file should be. Whatever those not-quite cars were, whoever wore those skins so well, they weren't working for us. They weren't working for law in any way I recognize. They were interested in collection. They took a category and filled it. I still check my mirrors more than I need to, and if a patrol unit with no plate slides up behind me and lingers, I don't argue with my gut. I let it pass. I don't look at the faces. There's a 911 call that recurs like a bad anniversary. The first came in before my time, a century ago in the way memory counts. A voice on a rural line, shallow with panic, saying there'd been a breakdown on the old state highway, mile marker that didn't exist on our maps, heat haze making the road judder. The operator logged it, sent a car, the car drove, reported nothing in the lanes, turned around, came back lightheaded and a little ashamed. These things happen. People misread a sign, radios eat minutes, except the call repeats. Once a year, sometimes twice, there's a car on the shoulder. My wife is in labor, my husband is hurt. I can't get the hood open, a different voice each time. Always with the same undertone you hear when someone's been crying too long, and their words arrive sanded thin. Always the same mile marker, wrong by 5 digits. Always the same mile-long stretch that refuses to admit it is just a mile long. I made the drive once, with the older cop's voice in my head and a thermos that kept the night from feeling too large. The highway in question runs through scrub and utility towers, an easy ribbon, a place you think the world can't get lost because the lines are so bold. The first time you notice it's wrong is small, a mile number that shouldn't be there, a set of reflectors that look like eyes if you let your imagination sit forward. The second time is larger. Your odometer says you've been moving and the world insists you haven't. There were no exits, there were no farm turnoffs, there were no air-grounded things like the sound a dog makes behind a fence or a porch light tucked under a tin awning. The road stretched and promised to end the way a long hallway promises a door. The fuel gauge drained faster than math should allow. The static on the radio found a tone the human body doesn't like and held it like a note in a throat too stubborn to stop. You test yourself in strange ways when the world disobeys. You tap the steering wheel and count. You survey the same smear on your windshield as if it were the North Star. You check the clock and feel anger at it for keeping time, as if time meant anything. I saw the same mile marker so many times it lost the dignity of a number and became an object. And then the road unrolled like a tongue, and there it was. A car on the shoulder. Hazards lancing red into the air, hood up, a figure leaning over the engine bay the way men have since engines replaced horses. A sane part of you does a risk check. White male, mid-40s, ball cap, sweatshirt. Good shape. Could be bait, could be bad luck. The older cop had told me, "Don't get out," and so I didn't. I rolled to a slow crawl and called out through the crack in my window, the sound whisked back by a breeze that had nowhere to be born. He lifted his head. His face had the empty concentration of someone reading a manual locked behind glass. He smiled, not at me, but near me. His mouth moved, forming the shape of an explanation, like belt or hose or battery. Behind him, down in the throat of the engine, something pulsed. Not light. A movement that argued with the idea of gears. Something like the slick peristalsis of a body, a slow squeeze and release as if the car had learned it could breathe. I asked him if he needed a tow, and he answered a sentence that didn't include my question, about almost done and just a minute. He had the patience of someone who had repeated the same task too many times. His hands looked clean, and then I saw they weren't. They were clean the way hands are clean in photographs, with the gloss of the pasting paper. He didn't blink while I watched. There was a moment where his head cocked like a dog hearing a sound I didn't, and he turned back to the engine with relief, like my interruption had ended and the show could resume. I drove on. Some combination of training and ugly instinct kept my tires on the white line and my foot steady. A mile became a quilt of miles. An hour became something I didn't want to name because clocks can be cruel if you insist. When the world decided I had paid enough attention to the wrong thing, an exit reappeared like a trick with sleeves. I took it. The ramp spit me into a town I recognized. Wrong era of coffee shop, right shape of church steeple. And I parked beside a machine that sold soda as if that meant civilization had kept its deal. Back at the station, the older cop showed me a curiosity he kept in the back of a drawer. A photo in a plastic sleeve with perspective gone a little weird. It was our highway. It was that shoulder. The car was the same model as mine except the year was not. The figure at the hood wore clothes out of a catalog that had stopped printing before I was born. The license on the bumper was from a state that had changed its colors twice since then. The photo had been taken on a Polaroid. On the white tab at the bottom, someone had written the same non-existent mile marker. The ink bled at the edges like veins. The call keeps coming. We record it, and we send a car because process matters even when the universe doesn't. Different years bring different details. Once it was a woman weeping and trying to catch her breath between please and help. Once it was a child's voice saying nothing and everything. Sometimes the road takes, and sometimes it lets you pass, but eats the hours off your bones. I know a trooper who drove it at noon and came back at midnight with a burn on one side of his face, like he'd fallen asleep on a beach. I don't know what's out there, a loop someone else put into our map. A snag in the weave where things get caught and wait for hands that don't arrive. If you want to make it bearable, call it a time seam and write a paper. If you want to survive it, keep your wheels moving and don't stop for people whose mouths form words that don't ask anything of you. Every year on the date the first call was logged, the line lights up again. The voice is never the same, but the fear is. The operators switch with each other quietly, the way nurses do when a patient reminds them of someone they lost. The memo from the brass says, "Be vigilant." The lesson I learned is shorter. Roads don't always go where asphalt says they do. I keep the 3 folders in the bottom drawer of a cabinet whose key I pretend to misplace. Sometimes I think about giving them to a reporter, letting the stories turn into clickbait and angry threads, and a documentary with moody drone shots. Then I picture the older cop's hands on the edges of the paper. How careful he was, how respect looks when a man who has seen too much refuses to say certain words out loud, and I lock the drawer again. We tell ourselves this job is about facts. We collect, we compare, we convince. Jurors like clean beginnings, middles, ends. The world is less generous. Some nights it pushes its face right up to the glass, fogs it, draws a smiley with a finger, and waits to see if you'll open the window. Some nights it wears a uniform you trust, or a storefront you love, or a mile of blacktop that never learned to stop. The older cop said something else that I didn't understand until I heard myself saying it to a kid with a new badge. The law can only touch what agrees to be touched. We did the work anyway. We pulled people out of holes. We told families what we could. We stood in rooms that didn't feel like rooms until the hairs on our arms learned a new language and prayed that saying nothing wasn't the same as lying. If you're listening because you like scary stories, fine. If you're listening because you want to feel safer afterward, I can't help you. I can only tell you what helps me. When the city smells wrong, I don't follow the scent underground. When a cruiser with no plate waits too patiently at the curb at 3 a.m, I let it wait. When a highway repeats itself like a bad dream, I don't stop to admire the symmetry of the line. There are cases we didn't solve because we weren't meant to. That isn't defeat, it's a kind of respect. Not every mystery is a locked door begging for a key. Some are a door that opens the other way. If you ever find yourself staring into a dark mouth of a tunnel, a car, a road, and your instinct tells you the mouth is staring back, listen to it. Back away. Let the thing pretend it wasn't hungry. Let it keep its mystery. Go home. Turn on a light you've turned on 1,000 times and be grateful when it behaves like a light should. I was a sergeant once. I'm an old man now. Some nights I wake to the smell of damp brick and metal on my tongue. Some nights to the shape of a smile that never needed eyes. Some nights to the long sound of tires on a road that doesn't end. On those nights I make coffee in the dark and wait for the sky to decide the world is ordinary again, and in the drawer the folders wait. They're patient, the way deep water is patient. I don't think we'll ever close them. I think they'll close us.